Imagine for a second just looking down at a tiny green sprout, just pushing its way up through the dirt in a little plastic balcony pot.
Right.
To most of us, I mean, it's just a weed,
Right.
a totally trivial byproduct of having a garden.
Yeah, completely ignorable.
But if you're a properly trained observer, that single little sprout can act as like a glitch in the matrix of human memory. It becomes this live, real-time demonstration of cognitive science unfolding in just a few cubic inches of soil.
It really does. It forces us to confront how our brains actually process the world around us. Because, we think we operate like cameras,
Right.
just passively recording what we see. But observation is this highly active, heavily filtered process.
Which is exactly what we are exploring today in this deep dive. We are looking at a fascinating microsource. It's this deeply observant journal entry published today, actually July 5, 2026.
Oh, wow. Fresh off the press.
Exactly. It's written by an author named Ang, and it's titled Notes on Gardening, Part 946, The Mystery Seedlings in My Balcony Pots.
I love that title.
Right. And get this, it is less than 150 words long.
That is incredibly short.
So short. But hidden inside this brief little account of just, scattering dried flowers into some dirt is an absolute masterclass. It touches on the mechanics of observation, the associative misfires of memory, and the undeniable cognitive power of just documenting your own thoughts.
The entry really operates as this perfect microcosm of the scientific method. I mean, Ang isn't writing some dense technical manual here. It's a personal blog post.
Right. It's just a guy or person on their balcony.
Exactly. But the methodology applied to this tiny balcony ecosystem reveals a highly sophisticated framework for pattern recognition. It's all right there in the text.
So let's trace how that framework actually begins, because the entry starts with a physical action. Ang is harvesting dried, spent flowers from various plants on this balcony. And instead of just, throwing them away in the compost or whatever, Ang casually scatters these dried remnants around into the empty pots.
Which is such a common gardener thing to do, honestly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it's essentially a botanical lottery. You take the chaotic, tangled leftovers of last season, introduce them to some soil, and just let nature randomize the outcome.
That element of randomization is absolutely crucial to what happens next, because gardening at this level, it sits right on the boundary between human intentionality and just pure biological chaos.
Yeah, you can't control it.
Right. Ang provides the staging area, the dirt, the empty space, but then completely surrenders control of the variables. The result is just immediate, unpredictable data.
And Ang explicitly documents that unpredictable data. The entry notes that new seeds started to germinate, but they germinated alongside some weeds.
That's a really specific phrasing.
It is, and initially reading that specific detail felt entirely redundant to me. I mean, if you have a pot of dirt outside, weeds are a given.
Well, for sure. They're everywhere.
Right. So documenting that weeds exist in a garden seemed like, documenting that there are clouds in the sky. It almost felt like wasted ink to even write it down.
I can see why you'd think that.
But the more I thought about it, noting the weeds proves something very specific about the observer's state of mind, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It proves the suspension of the brain's natural prediction engine.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, our brains are incredibly energy-intensive organs, right? And to conserve that energy, they rely really heavily on selective attention.
Because we can't process everything all at once.
Exactly. We subconsciously filter out expected baseline information so we can focus solely on the novel or the necessary stuff.
Oh, like the famous invisible gorilla experiment.
Yes, perfect example.
Where people are so focused on counting the basketball passes on screen that they completely fail to see a person in a full gorilla suit just walking right through the frame.
Precisely. If Ang had only been looking for the desired flower seedlings, the brain would have visually filtered out the weeds entirely.
It would have just been invisible noise.
Exactly, invisible noise. But by actively logging the presence of the weeds, Ang demonstrates this conscious override of that cognitive filter. It shows an observer who is intentionally assessing the entire ecosystem, demanding that the brain process both the signal and the noise.
Because you can't accurately identify the signal if you haven't defined the noise.
Nailed it.
It grounds the whole observation. So out of this unfiltered assessment of all the pots, one specific container demands closer inspection. Ang zeroes in on the visual evidence of these mystery seedlings.
And the description is great.
It really is. Ang describes them as having elongated leaves with a red hue in the middle of the stems.
That shift right there, From a macro view of the whole balcony to a micro-morphological description of a single stem, that is where the cognitive friction really begins.
Oh, so.
Because Ang is attempting to perform a visual pattern match against an internal database, like a detective looking at a forensic sketch.
And this is where we encounter that incredibly specific, just incredibly frustrating neurological
Probably
flow.
the worst feeling.
We've all had it. Ang looks at the red hue on the stem, processes the elongated leaves, and feels a really strong initial instinct that the plant is amaranth. But then, almost immediately, Ang heavily doubts that instinct. And we know this feeling. It's leaflogica, right? That tip-of-the-tongue sensation where a memory is right there, just hovering on the edge of consciousness.
You just can't grab it.
Exactly. The brain simply refuses to grant you full access to the file. Why does our memory fail us when we are looking right at the physical evidence?
Because human memory is fundamentally associative. It's not isolated.
Okay, so associative.
Right. When you learn to identify a mature amaranth plant, your brain doesn't just store an isolated photograph of a red stem in some filing cabinet.
It's not just a JPEG in there.
Exactly. It creates a clustered network of neural connections. It wires the visual data of the plant, together with the context of where you usually see it, the season it blooms, the size of the surrounding foliage.
Maybe even the smell of the mature flowers.
Yes. All of that is tied together. But right now, on the balcony, Ang is looking at a baby sprout.
So it's totally devoid of its mature context.
Exactly. The visual cortex recognizes the morphological trait, the red stem, and it fires off a signal.
Like an alarm going off.
Yeah, but for the hippocampus to retrieve the complete memory, it usually requires those surrounding contextual triggers to complete the neural circuit.
And they just aren't there.
Right, because the context is mismatched. The brain serves up a familiarity signal, but it stops short of full retrieval.
So the hesitation we see in the journal entry isn't just Ang being indecisive or confused.
No, not at all.
It's Ang recognizing that the brain's pattern-matching software is operating on incomplete data. There's a refusal to let a partial visual match override the lack of contextual evidence.
It's a highly disciplined hesitation. In situations like this, the human mind desperately wants closure. We are so prone to confirmation bias.
We just want the answer.
We want to take that first associative hit, the word amaranth, and simply declare the mystery solved so we can move on with our day.
Right, tick the box.
But Ang actively resists that cognitive shortcut. By heavily doubting the initial instinct, Ang forces the brain to stay in an uncomfortable state of inquiry.
Wow. And because the brain fails to retrieve that amaranth file purely on visual cues, Ang has to build a bridge to that memory.
Yes.
And the tool for that bridge isn't a magnifying glass, and it isn't digging up the plant.
No, it's not.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The tool is a keyboard.
I love this part.
The crux of this entire scenario happens away from the balcony. It is only while drafting the blog post that the epiphany hits. Ang writes, "Only while drafting this post did it dawn on me that these are probably celosia seedlings."
That transition right there from passive observation to active documentation is the catalyst for the entire realization.
It perfectly mirrors the programming concept of rubber duck debugging. Have you heard of this?
Oh yeah, it's a classic.
For those listening who might not know, when software developers hit a wall with the bug they just can't solve, they will literally place a small rubber duck on their desk and explain the code, line by line, out loud to the toy.
And it works.
It does. The act of doing that almost always reveals the error. But it's not because the duck is magic. It's because silent thought is a massive, multidimensional, parallel processing cloud.
It's messy up there.
Super messy. You can hold a dozen contradictory, abstract ideas in your head at once, but the moment you have to explain it to the duck, or in Ang's case, write it down for a blog post, you force that massive cloud of thought through the narrow, linear bottleneck of human language.
That's a great way to put it. You are describing the neurological shift from spatial and abstract processing to linguistic serialization.
Linguistic serialization.
Yeah. When Ang is standing on the balcony looking at the plant, the thoughts are fleeting visual impressions, just flashes of color and shape. But to write the sentence, elongated leaves with a red hue, Ang has to recruit entirely different areas of the brain, specifically those dealing with language and syntax.
You have to put the visual data into a strict grammatical structure.
Yeah.
Subject, verb, object.
Precisely. And that physical translation forces the brain to evaluate the data a second time through an entirely different neural pathway.
Oh, wow.
The abstract impression is converted into concrete data points. This cross-referencing is what breaks the mental block. By externalizing the cognitive load onto the page, Ang frees up the working memory to finally connect the dots.
And the connection Ang makes is brilliant. Not only does the drafting process reveal that these are likely celosia seedlings, but Ang notes in the text that celosia is actually related to amaranth.
Yes.
They share a taxonomic family, the Amaranthaceae family, which proves that the brain's initial subconscious pattern matching, that quick flash of "this looks like amaranth," was actually functioning perfectly.
It was an incredibly accurate biological association. The brain recognized the familial genetic traits shared by the two plants.
It wasn't wrong.
No, it just lacked the specific vocabulary to articulate the difference between the cousins until the writing process organized the data.
It just shows how much knowledge is locked inside our heads, completely inaccessible until we provide the structural framework of language to pull it out.
It's fascinating.
And that framework brings us to a really striking detail in the source material. It's the title of the post itself. Notes on Gardening, Part 946.
Yeah, that number represents a staggering amount of temporal architecture.
946 entries. And it pays off because the realization about the celosia immediately triggers a specific memory for Ang. The entry references a previous post, Part 944, where Ang had previously found a rogue celosia growing on its own. The sheer volume of this documentation is doing heavy lifting here.
Because memory isn't just about retrieval, right? It's about architecture. By numbering and logging these observations over time, Ang has built a personal, highly searchable knowledge base.
Which is so much better than relying on just our brains.
Way better. Human memory is notoriously volatile, but externalized documentation is permanent. You don't get to casually connect an observation in Part 946 to an event in Part 944 if you haven't put in the disciplined work to write the previous 945 entries.
It's like the compounding interest of paying attention.
That's exactly what it is.
A trivial detail logged a month ago suddenly becomes the missing key to a mystery today. It shifts the entire purpose of keeping a journal, in my opinion.
How so?
Well, we usually assume people write things down to record what they already know, like a historical record. But Ang is demonstrating that you write things down to figure out what you don't know yet. The writing isn't the artifact of the thought. The writing is the generator of the thought.
Oh, that's beautifully said. And yet, even with that generated epiphany, Ang doesn't claim total victory. The drafting process reveals a highly probable answer, celosia, but there is no declaration of absolute certainty. The post concludes with an acknowledgement of time. Ang writes, "Nevertheless, we'll be sure in the coming weeks, once these seedlings mature to a certain size. Till the next post."
This might actually be the most countercultural element of the entire journal entry.
It really is.
Because keep in mind, this post is published today, in the summer of 2026. We live in an information environment defined by instantaneous resolution.
Everything is right at our fingertips.
Exactly. Ang is holding a device, or has access to a device, that possesses advanced augmented reality lenses. Ang could just snap a photo of that red-hued stem, and a machine learning model would cross-reference a global database to deliver a 99% accurate botanical identification in less than 2 seconds.
The tools for immediate cognitive bypass are readily available. They are everywhere.
But Ang actively chooses not to use them. Ang opts out of the instant answer and decides to let the natural timeline dictate the acquisition of the knowledge. We'll be sure in the coming weeks.
It's a very deliberate choice.
So let's look at the mechanism of that choice. In 2026, when we are so used to instant gratification, is there a distinct value in just letting a mystery remain a mystery for a little while? What happens to our understanding of a subject when we intentionally delay closure?
Well, we really have to differentiate between data acquisition and knowledge integration.
Okay, break down the difference.
If Ang uses an AI lens to identify the seedling, the brain acquires a label. Celosia. Boom. Done. The mystery is solved, the cognitive loop is closed, and the brain immediately discards the inquiry to move on to the next stimulus.
Right, it doesn't stick around.
Exactly. It rarely commits that instantly acquired label to long-term memory because no real effort was expended to retrieve it.
It's why we can navigate a new city using a GPS map 10 times in a row, but the moment our phone dies, we are completely lost.
Yes.
We offloaded the spatial processing to the machine, so our brain never bothered to build the mental map.
Exactly. By choosing to wait for the seedling to mature, Ang is leveraging a psychological phenomenon known as the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Right, which dictates that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks significantly better than completed ones. By leaving the identification technically unconfirmed, Ang creates an open cognitive loop.
So the brain is forced to stay engaged with the plant.
Yes. For the next few weeks, every single time Aang steps onto that balcony, the observation will be active. Aang will notice the structural changes as the stem thickens.
Right.
Aang will see how the elongated leaves respond to varying degrees of sunlight or water. By the time that plant finally produces a mature bloom to confirm its identity, Aang won't just know the name of the plant. Aang will understand the biology, the resilience, and the life cycle of the plant.
Wow. The AI gives you the vocabulary, but waiting gives you the fluency.
That's a great distinction.
It's the difference between knowing the name of the thing and knowing the thing itself. It frames epistemic patience not just as this quaint, romantic notion of enjoying nature, but as a rigorous cognitive strategy.
It really is a strategy.
In a world completely optimized for instant gratification and immediate data retrieval, choosing to wait is how we ensure knowledge is actually integrated into our understanding of the world.
It is the realization that while technology operates in milliseconds, true comprehension still requires the passage of time. The human mind just needs a runway to synthesize what it observes.
Which brings this really fascinating symmetry to this entire deep dive. I mean, we started with the chaotic, rapid scattering of dried flowers, right? A burst of biological noise.
Yeah.
And we end with a deliberate, patient commitment to watch a single stem grow over weeks.
And in between those 2 points, we trace the entire architecture of how we learn.
We really did.
We saw the conscious override of our brain's prediction engine, forcing the eye to acknowledge the weeds instead of filtering them out. We unpacked the frustrating mechanics of lithologica, where the visual cortex recognizes a pattern, but the hippocampus refuses to retrieve the memory without proper context.
And we looked at how the act of writing forces that multidimensional cloud of abstract thought through the linear bottleneck of language, bridging the gap between an instinct about amaranth and a revelation about celosia. And finally, we explored the cognitive benefits of leaving the loop open, utilizing that Zeigarnik effect to build deep understanding rather than just settling for cheap, instant data.
It is a powerful reminder that profound insights rarely announce themselves loudly. They're usually just hiding in the mundane, waiting for an observer disciplined enough to notice them, articulate them, and give them time to develop.
This proves you really don't need to be exploring a vast jungle or analyzing a massive global data set to uncover the mechanics of human thought.
Not at all.
Whether you are piecing together a complex logistical problem at work, trying to articulate a new creative strategy, or just staring at a plastic pot on your balcony on a Sunday afternoon, your active observation and your willingness to structuralize your thoughts on paper are the absolute most potent tools you possess.
The complexity is always there, provided you're willing to look closely enough to see it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought to mull over. We watched how Aang solved a botanical mystery simply by the mechanical act of sitting down to document the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Think about a nagging problem, a half-formed idea, or a mystery seedling that is currently occupying your own mind right now. If you sat down tonight, opened a blank document, and forced your abstract thoughts through that linear bottleneck of language by writing part 1 of your own detailed notes, what unexpected answers might suddenly dawn on you before you even finish the page?